Afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our final housing related webinar of the summer. This is our second summer doing these. I'm so glad you could all join us. Today's webinar is about how zoning affects affordable housing. My name is Amber Harrison, and I am the Housing Innovation Manager for York Community Service Association, and I'm the local health officer for the town of York. And again, this is our fourth and final housing seminar of the summer. We hope that you can learn about how zoning directly affects your ability to create and access affordable housing. And I want to thank you for taking the time to join us today. This housing seminar was brought to you by a joint grant received from MaineHousing by York Community Service Association here in York and Fairtide in Kittery. The Housing Navigator Pilot Program is a 2-year project established by the legislature through LD 1733. And the navigators, like myself, for this program, we work with families experiencing or at risk of homelessness in obtaining housing and assisting them in maintaining stable housing following lease up. The 3 major components of the program are landlord engagement, pre-tenancy assistance, and housing stability services. Today, we will dive into topics such as how to use Maine's state housing portal, what are TDFs and TIFs and transfer development rights. I will also look at local zoning, really local, Southern Maine and right over in Dover, York, Kittery, and Dover zoning, and how it directly affects your ability to create and access that affordable housing. And to make sure we are helping you as best we can, we've collected your questions at registration, and I've shared those questions with our speakers, who will do their best to weave them into their presentations. You can also schedule a free consultation with me on your property's potential to create a rental unit through our website or email or phone number. I'll be happy to send a follow-up link with this recording, and you'll have all my contact information. This webinar will also be available on YCSA's website as well as York Public Library's YouTube channel. I invite you to look at the Housing Solutions Library that we've created over the last 2 years at YCSA of several webinars. We have a great agenda and wonderful speakers today. We're going to start with Eric Jorgenson. He is a Senior Director of Government Relations and Communications with MaineHousing. He will be reviewing the state's housing portal. We also have DeCarlo Brown. He is the York planner. He'll be sharing what's going on in York. We've got Max Zakian from Kittery Planner. He's on there too, sharing what's going on in Kittery. And Ryan Pope will be talking about what's happening in Dover. He is the Dover Housing Navigator, Assistant City Planner there, and he'll be talking about TDFs and transfer of development rights. And then I will close out and remind you all to join us again at our next series. So with that, I'd like to start by opening up to Eric. Thank you for joining us, Eric. I'd love to hear more about the Maine State Housing Portal.
Well, thank you. I'm really glad to be here. I enjoyed my appearance with you folks last year talking about, I sort of forget what it was, but we talking about something to do with housing. But today I'm going to talk about the state data portal. I've got a few examples from that. It's not a live demonstration. I didn't quite have the courage to go try to do a live online thing just in case of technical problems, but I did put some slides together showing how the data portal works. So I'm going to share my screen, and there we go. Is that working for people? All right, I'm going to assume it is. So I just want to first again say thank you for having me. This is a picture of our office in Augusta as it will look in a few weeks from now. I hope. It seems a little hard to believe that we're already going there, but we're a quasi-governmental agency located here in Augusta whose purpose is to help alleviate the problems of inadequate, unaffordable, or unsafe housing. And despite the name, we're not part of state government. Our primary purpose is as a public purpose bank in which all the lending supports affordable housing construction or first-time homebuyer mortgages, but we also run a number of federal programs around lead remediation, LIHEAP, weatherization, and some of those things. We also serve as the public housing authority for those parts of Maine that do not already have their own municipal housing authority. And so with all those, we're sort of a multi-purpose agency. We're largely self-funded through the bonds we sell on Wall Street, but we also get an increasingly important percentage of our budget from the state. And that doesn't pay for our administration or our staffing, but It helps us contribute to the record amount of housing production that's currently in progress. I'm not a planner. I'm just going to try to provide you with a little bit of information on this data, the data portal. So this portal, this project is an outgrowth of the state of Maine's housing production needs study, which was completed last year. And that grew out of LD 2003, which was the bill that came in the beginning of the 130th legislature to really try to reform how housing is produced in Maine. It's a very broad-reaching legislation. You've heard a lot about it. One of our roles is to be sort of one of the state's housing policy entities. So we work a lot with the governor's office and the legislature on various policy projects to sort of better understand Maine's housing needs. LD 2003 resulted in the state of Maine housing production needs study, which analyzed the housing shortage we face. It determined that we need around 35,000 more units now as a state, and probably an additional 35,000 units or so by 2030. And the thing about this particular data portal, the thing about that particular housing production needs study, which is available on our website or any of those other entities, the governor's office and the DECD. The thing about that is that it's a really interesting document. It's good reading, but it's also very not granular at all. It talks a lot about high level, sort of very, very generalized information about analyzing the situation as a state. It's full of information on a lot of housing issues. This is just one illustration from the report that I chose. This looks at where people are moving within Maine, and more significantly, where people are coming from or where they're moving from out of state to Maine. The 16 counties in this case are shown as the circles. Bigger circles show more people coming in, and the higher they are on the x-axis shows a greater percentage of people coming from out of state. So you really see York County right in the center there. It's one of the highest percentages of people coming in from out of state. And as you can see, there's an average income that's higher from the immigrants or the in-migrants compared to the people who are here already. And that factors into affordability. So we were thinking about, we had that information, but we really thought we wanted to get a data portal set up that would provide more localized information for people who are in the town planning world and municipal government, and just citizens who wanted to learn more about housing in their communities. So what we see really is, so we really tried to think of, create something that would monitor housing markets, provide a central repository of data, and also support communities with a lot of information. So I wanted just to start with I'm going to show you a few screenshots of this. I'm not going to take a whole lot of time, because you've got the real planning experts coming behind me. But the screenshots I think are interesting, because it gives you a taste of what this resource provides. And I just, this is looking at the total households in Maine by household size. And I think that just gives an example of the sorts of statewide data that you can find. In this case, it shows household size and how that's changed over time. We have a total of 560 or so thousand households in Maine, with the lion's share, as you can see in the blue, or the purple and the blue, being 1 or 2 person households. And they go up from there, as you can see in those smaller lines at the top. What I would direct your attention to, though, which I think is really cool, is the ability to go deep and go local. And you can cut the data by town, by county, and you can compare multiple jurisdictions on one screen. So this is an example of a comparison view between York and Waterville. And I chose Waterville just because it's the town in Maine that's the closest in size to York. And it's obviously a very different town, so I thought it might be an interesting thing to look at here. But the dashboard allows you to look at, you can look at those tabs at the top. You can see demographics, income and jobs, housing supply, rental affordability, and homeownership access. And here with York versus Waterville, we're looking at a population change from 2012 to 2017, and again from 2012 to 2023. So what you see is up to 2017, actually Waterville was outgrowing York. But after the pandemic hit, you can see that York's growth just sort of exploded at around 8% in that particular period, and it's much larger. Waterville hardly moved at all. So I think that's the kind of thing which is interesting. This all comes out of available data from the Census Department. I thought another interesting slide that was interesting was you could do comparisons of occupancy status. In this case, I'm showing occupancy, and just for kicks, I thought I'd add Kittery in. So we actually here have York, Waterville, and Kittery. And what this shows most dramatically is that York has a lot of vacant homes. That's the gold thing at the upper left that says 37% of York's housing is vacant. That seems to be that's a categorical anomaly from the Census Department, because I think that's taking into account all the seasonal homes and vacation homes that are available in York. But you can see quite clearly that York and Waterville and Kittery all have between 50 and 60% owner-occupied homes. There's a real variation in renter-occupied units. Those would be permanent apartments as opposed to something like, say, Airbnb. Many more in Waterville, 30% in Kittery, and just 12% in York. But again, this is the sort of stuff that you can see using this data set, and it's really cool. And I just encourage you all to go in and play with it. I thought I'd also throw in a thing about building types. Single family homes dominate in both York and Waterville here, but more in York. Slightly more multifamily housing in Waterville, and more mobile homes in Waterville. But again, you can cut this data any way you like using the information. You can just, there's knob or buttons you can press to do this, and it's quite straightforward. I think median household income over time is a very important aspect. Obviously, it determines affordability. Waterville's gone from around 35,000 to 40,000 over the course of between 2012 and 2022. It's probably gone even more now. But York during the same period went from 70 to over 100,000, a slightly steeper increase, and obviously a higher level of median household income, which again is an important driver of affordability. And these are just examples. And then what all these examples, you put them together, you start to get a sense of, comparisons around people who are cost burdened. And one of the things that Amber asked me to talk about quickly was the idea of what does it mean to have an affordable home? What is affordable? What is affordability? And the way we define it is through the way HUD does, which is basically you say that if you pay 30% or less of your annual income on housing, it's affordable. And if it's more than that, it's unaffordable. And it doesn't take long to realize that many people in Maine, probably the majority of people in Maine, are dealing with affordability issues that are significant. In this case, you see we've got Waterville. I put Kittery back in here again. So Waterville in purple, Kittery in blue, and York in gold. And you can see it's interesting because York and Kittery have very, very similar profiles around affordability and cost burdening in terms of the percentage of people that are in that place. But you can see that among the senior households, with the people on the right, the older Mainers, it's even more. It's up to like 35% almost in those two coastal communities, whereas Waterville is still significant, but it's around 17% of all owners and around 25% of senior households. So that's the kind of stuff this data provides. And the best way to learn it is to just go in there and fool around with it and experiment with it. Each page has an opportunity. If you find a couple of jurisdictions you want to compare, you can print out a full report. It'll go through and give out the entire data set. The only other thing I just add is that in small towns, you tend to get variations of data that aren't always clear or always accurate. It's just the law of small numbers. So you can't always trust. If something's really a crazy number to you, it's probably worth checking in with MaineHousing or some other place to get some insight on it, because really this is just pulling data from publicly available sources. But I still think it's a very useful document. Here is the URL for this particular resource. It's a joint project of Maine Housing, the governor's office, and the Department of Economic and Community Development. And we're really proud of it. And it's really been a great project to work on. And I hope people will find it useful. And if there's problems you discover with it as you use it, I hope you'll let us know about that as well. So Amber, I think I'm just going to stop there. I think I'll stop sharing if that makes sense, but I don't want to hog the time.
Thank you, Eric. That was a great introduction to affordability and the state's portal. I was lucky enough to be present at the conference last year when we talked about the report, and now seeing the portal come out and seeing people use it, particularly to create housing goals for their communities. I think it's a great tool for municipalities to decide where they are and where they need to be looking at these demographics. Certainly, I would love to see something that was, we're getting information like every month. Census is once a year, but I'm sure as this is evolving, you're going to be working on trying to get even more current, less than a year in your data. But I really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you again. Another fun summer of housing affordability. Thank you, Eric.
Well, I'll just say one thing I will add is you'll be seeing very soon a companion piece to this, which is the state's strategy for trying to, or first of all, it's going to be the regional goals for actually what each region really we hope should be producing. Those aren't enforceable or anything, but those are the goals that the state is thinking is the right way to set it. And that's been set by a lot of people in the planning community and others. And then we're also working right now on a strategic document with those other two agencies to try to figure out just how to actually get there. What's the practical way of actually doing that? And that ought to really help as well. So more to come on all of this. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. And next we're going to go to DeCarlo Brown, the planner here in York. Welcome, DeCarlo.
Hi, everybody. My name is DeCarlo Brown, the town planner for the town of York. And so I'll be talking to you a little bit about what zoning is, and specifically in York, what zoning does. And I really do thank Eric for starting it off there, because when we're talking about housing, we are talking about markets, plural. And I really do thank Eric for actually saying that. And what housing is and how that relates to zoning is that basically zoning actually is a response to the demand that you're getting in an area. People are coming for an area for a certain purpose, and your housing actually supports that purpose, and the zoning supports that housing. To give you an idea, there's different buckets of people who are going to be coming to an area for certain reasons, and they're going to be using housing for different reasons. And for housing in particular, normally we're talking about families, the family household of 2, 3, 4 people, but we could be talking about the single workers or the couple workers who are coming here to work, or we can talk about retirees who are moving to a certain place and they're not working, and so they have different needs. But we have other pockets too that work on the demand side. So seasonal workers, so people who actually don't live here full time, and they're not they're not short term. They're coming here for a seasonal portion to work for a particular time period, and then to go back where their long term is. And some of those charts that you've seen from Eric, you can start to see some of those other demands as well for short term. So when we're talking about short-term housing, we're not just talking about the single-family house or the multifamily housing, but you have B&Bs, you have short-term rentals, and you also have hotels. They all work within your housing stock to basically make up your supply of what are people staying in, how do people are housed when they come to stay in your locality. And the reason why that's important is because if you have something in your locality that's really bringing people and hitting you on the demand side, then you're really going to have to work on your housing stock and how you're responding to that. And those can actually conflict with each other. For example, a house can be used as a traditional bed and breakfast, or it can be used for a longer term tenant for a family, or it can be broken up to be used for single occupants, or it can be used for short-term rentals, or have you. And so that same stock, that building, can be used in different ways and to work towards fulfilling your demand side. Now here in York, you really have to think about, and really nationwide, zoning works on the police power. which means it needs to be predictable and it needs to basically stop the nuisance. That's the whole reason that zoning exists, to stop the nuisance. It's really stems from a time when we had what's called tenement houses, where workers would go into a structure and live in a structure, but they would have clean air, clean water, or what have you. And it got to a point where we as a country said, okay, we need to put some rules and regulations on this. In addition to that, there were certain situations where you had industrial uses like brick making that was close by, where you really had to make some guidelines of, hey, this is our rules for where people live for health reasons, and then this is for health reasons we need to move this use to somewhere else. And so when we're talking about housing, we're talking about regulations on health, the environment, and then what mostly we hear about, which is not related to those two, is quality of life. Now, it's really important to make this distinction between those, because where zoning is made for a particular purpose, it's also being used to impact your supply, but also work with your demand. And so where traditionally it's a supply side regulation, it also can work with demand, because if you have really good housing or really good connectivity, it also bolsters that demand that people want to live in that type of place. And so you hear about terms how urbanism, you hear about walkability, and those are things that from the zoning side, you're impacting your demand because more people want to live there because it's a comfortable place to be. Where in relation to the other places around you, and that's where you always say it's a market, because it also has to do with your competitors in a regional scale of how well are you doing in comparison to the people around you as well. And that's going to impact your demand. Now, for here, and in general in this area, we traditionally have lost people, right? We've always heard in Maine the brain drain. Our average age is really high because traditionally we've been losing people. Now that's changed, and you've seen in those charts, those have changed. But zoning and law moves slowly. It doesn't move as fast as those changes in demand side. And so here in York, we're currently dealing with those legacies of those regulations that have incentivized a different type of demand. So for instance, in York, we have a few things, right? We have some incentive that we put in place a while ago. So in certain zones, we have unlimited density above commercial in some of our Route 1 zones. The reason being is that we wanted to have that incentive for people to start living here again. We have bonus for affordable housing, but we allow up to 120% of AMI for both ownership and rentals. So you can see how that incentivizes a different stock to be built in your locality. And then we also put in place some version of inclusionary zoning, but only for subdivisions over 10 units. And so again, you have a different incentive than for people to, if a large developer is coming in, yes, they would have to provide affordable housing, what we define as affordable housing. But under that, we really just let it go, right? You can do what you want, and there's no affordability aspect that you do within that. And so right now we're tackling that. Okay, now what do we need? What demand do we need to fill most readily? And in York, we do have some issues. We have some issues with our labor force. So right now, there's a demand issue where a lot of people want to be in York and use our housing stock for a particular purpose, but we also have a working population that has to be in here in order to provide those services for those people. And if we do not provide that housing or get incentivize that housing, then we have a problem with actually giving those services, but then will impact our demand. And you can see how that is cyclical and all related to each other. Because if our demand drops too much off a threshold, then you might have the opposite issue where you have too many homes being vacant, and then you have slums being started up, then you have degradation of your physical infrastructure, and you don't have those funds to actually support your municipality. And so it's very interrelated once you see the problem into totality, and not just that, hey, how many affordable units have you created this year, or how many affordable units have you created next year? You really do have to see how it connects to each other. And you know, I'm a geography guy, and so it's also in related to what are you close to. So here, you know, we're very close to Portsmouth market, and we are very close to the Naval Yard. And so, you know, nationwide, naval bases have closed. Bases have closed, and they've consolidated, which put more demand on the bases that stayed open and to grow. And Naval Yard is one of those bases has been marked to grow. And so you have that more demand coming in. At the same time, you had the pandemic just really change how the workforce is, how far the workforce can work from their actual companies. And so you have those two demand hits at the same time happening. And now you have to think of how are we going to address this in a way that our community feels appropriate, because all solutions are not going to be appropriate. And here we have, you know, any town that you're going to go to, pretty much in the United States, you're going to have a growth area, and then you have an area that you're reserving for your natural areas. And really, you're going to think about what are the solutions that you can do in your growth area to make sure that you're directing that growth in the way you want to go. Because as far as land use is concerned, you cannot stop growth. It's illegal to put a moratorium forever on any type of growth in any type in people trying to move in. And you wouldn't want to, because if you do that, then your prices will continue to grow, because you just stopped the supply side, but you haven't stopped the demand side. The demand side continues to grow, which puts up prices. And then if we're talking about our population, our demand circles, then that's going to put more pressure on your retirees. So people who bought homes, right? They've paid off their homes, but their taxes are going to continue to grow up. And everyone's going to wonder, well, what's going on? I bought my house and I thought I was safe, but now we're seeing the problem where, well, the demand is keeping going up and you haven't actually built more homes. And so that your taxes are going to continue to grow. And then it's going to become a point, if it grows too greatly on this side, is that you'll have that population has to deal with the problem of, hey, I've been here for 15, 20 years, and now I can't afford to be here anymore. And so really it's a balancing that that the town of York is trying to undergo right now. And as a part of that is working on both sides, is that the town of York has put up for vote is minimum dwelling sizes. Before, we've had multiple minimum dwelling sizes between, depending on what zone you're in, 400, 500, 600. That has now been basically eliminated down to 190, and that's up for vote on this fall. Another thing that we've done is absolutely we implemented all the provisions of LD 2003, which basically ADUs on every lot. We've already had that before, so we didn't really have a problem with that. In addition to that, the bonuses for multifamily housing, because we did the work previously to make sure that multifamily housing was only allowed within our growth area, then we could really concentrate on those sectors, and the incentives that we had before LD 2003 actually go above and beyond the requirements of LD 2003 already. So we didn't really have a problem with those either. Now, the problem that we are going to be having going forward is that, you know, like I said, it's in relation to the areas around you. Before, it was very attractive of what we had for affordable housing provisions of, hey, we're being very permissive in the amount of units that you can put in. But now that everyone else has it, now the question is, well, how are you going to stay above that line? What are you going to do now in order to make sure that this town stays attractive to those type of opportunities, or this type of grants, or this type of developers who are able to come in and spend that money? And so that's a question that's ongoing. I believe that the town is going to start. It does have, you know, a certain plan to put together a committee to talk about affordability. We do know that, you know, that's a double-edged sword, because if you're doing things by committee, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to meet the needs of what your town actually says it. But that's a part of being a part of a democracy, is going together and making those decisions in order to say, okay, we're going to try this, but we need to make sure that if this doesn't work, that we're going to try this, or that. And so that's just a broad overview of how those very big market level forces impact at the local level. And then the only thing else I'll say is that on the ballot this fall is our new Greenway District, which actually changes the way that certain zoning occurs. One big thing is that a house, it's a form-based code, which means that we're really concentrating on the relationship between the structure and the public sphere, and not so much what's going on inside your home. An example of that is that a house can now have 2 units within it. So outside, it needs to look like a house, but inside, you can have 2 units however you want it. One thing we found is that the ADU provisions, because you put a percentage on, hey, an ADU can only be 30% of the house, it's really concentrating when you do that is on exterior, if you're making an addition. But interior to the house, does that really make sense? And the answer is always no, it doesn't. Because as a house, we're really concentrating on how big that house is, how close that house is to its neighbors. So why not give the flexibility interior to that house? The reason why it doesn't go higher than that is because after 2 units inside our house, you go into a different building code, which is not zoning, but it does impact what things that you want to do as far as zoning is concerned. Other things that we've done is that made within that zone, cottage style housing is now going to be allowed. So no longer is it going to be directed towards car based. So, if people are aware, when you make a single family home regular in zoning that has been for the last 50 years, you have to take into account car parking. If you want to have a dwelling unit, you have to have a car place to park there, like right where that unit is. This provides a little bit more flexibility, and yeah, you have to take into account the amount of cars that's going to be into that development, but it doesn't have to be right where that house is. You can put the parking, somewhere else in that development where it makes sense, and so you can get a better use of that space. Now, I've been talking a lot, but I do recommend everyone, going to our website, yorkmaine.org, looking at our provisions, our zoning ordinance, also looking at the new version of the Greenway District, because there's very different ways that we've done things, and we split it up into a residential areas, and then mixed use areas, and then natural areas that really go with what the land can support and what utilities can support. And then providing that flexibility to the developer and to the homeowner, really, to allow them to create more housing but not impact their neighbors. And that's what people are concerned with, is those two things. We want to add additional housing units, but we don't want to change how that neighborhood operates. And there's very direct ways to do that. If you're concerned with how the distance between this building and that building, then that's the thing that you regulate. You don't regulate an arbitrary number on density. You regulate, hey, the distance away from houses from that way or from that way. And if you want to continue this conversation, I'll be here to take comments within the next week or so. But I'm always open, and I can give my personal information to Amber, to anybody who'd like to connect on top of that. So thank you guys. And I'll be here for questions as well.
Thank you, DeCarlo. That was a great rundown. I appreciate it. I know that Greenway District Report, when I found it online, had some great schematics, some really nice pictures, and it really helped me understand too, from just a visual of what neighborhoods might look like. And I think people also like to look at some design standards too there in those. I think the report is online for the Greenway District through your website. So I will also send that link when we do a follow-up from this webinar, and I send out the link. I will direct them to that Greenway District overlay. Thank you. Our next presenter, Max Zakian from Kittery, who is a planner there, and we invite you for the first time to join us and talk about what's going on in Kittery. Welcome, Max.
Thanks, Amber. It's great to be here. All right, moment of truth. Let's see if I can share my screen. Can people see that?
Yes, I can
Okay.
see it. Yes. Thank you.
We're in business. Okay, so I'm here to talk at kind of a more local level. We've heard some high level stuff for affordability. Now we're going to get into the trenches with the actual ordinance at play in a town. So Kittery's affordable housing ordinance is actually pretty new. I didn't help write the ordinance, but I'm the first planner to actually implement it in development projects. And as all of you are aware, I'm sure, if you're the first person to implement a new and important ordinance, it's always really fun and exciting and not confusing at all. There's never any challenges. It's super easy. So it has been really rewarding, though, getting to see some affordable units get squeezed in where otherwise they wouldn't have. So I'm really just here to talk about the mechanics of our ordinance in particular, give some examples that I thought were fun to share, and then just bring up my experiences for people that are interested in doing something like this in their town. So how they could craft it or do things a little bit differently. So just to start, Kittery's affordable housing ordinance is based on inclusionary zoning. That basically means that whenever you propose a residential development, you have to make a percentage of it affordable. In Kittery, that's 10%. That's the minimum for any project of 5 units or more. The only alternative is an in lieu fee of $100,000 for every required affordable unit that you can pay in advance instead of an affordable unit. That money is always tied directly into our affordable housing fund. So it goes towards projects to deal with the housing crisis one way or the other. Our requirements are pretty much all tied to area median income. We actually require a deed restriction for every affordable unit, designating it as affordable for at least 30 years. And then we actually use a lot of MaineHousing's data, credit to Eric, to calculate what the median income looks like every year, and even what the maximum gross rent or mortgage price for every month looks like. Because MaineHousing actually, they take the census data and they show what it looks like every single year for us to utilize, and it makes the process a lot easier. For rental properties, we tie it to 80% of AMI, both the income threshold and the monthly rent. And then for owner-occupied purchase projects, we tie it to 120% AMI, both the income threshold and the monthly mortgage. We also do require that utilities be deducted from that number just to make sure that it's a little more attainable, whatever that rent is. And again, credit to MaineHousing. They give us a utility allowance chart, which we use to determine what that number is. The developers really like it when we can give them an actual approximation. My favorite thing before I move on about our affordable housing ordinance, there is a lot of verbiage that focuses on making sure those affordable units are actually desirable. So the material of the affordable units has to be similar to the materials used to build the market rate units. The quality and the size has to be the same. Even the location is kind of looked at just to make sure that you're not segregating the affordable units in one separate building in a larger complex. So really just to focus on the inclusionary aspect of inclusionary zoning. So just to talk about the carrots that we have, by and large, the favorite incentive that we have that developers have mentioned is our permitting discounts. Not very surprising. What they get, it really depends on how many affordable units they propose, but we offer up to a 20% discount on permitting costs for everything except for sewer fees for utility installation. So that's planning board review, that's building permit, that's everything. So for large enough projects, that will save you tens of thousands of dollars or maybe even more on your fees. We also have just a few incentives peppered in most of our zones to further incentivize affordable housing use. So reductions on requirements for landscaping plan, affecting standards like setbacks or height. Even before LD 2003, which I'll talk about for a little bit, we had a few zones that had density incentives if you had enough affordable housing. So LD 2003 was really just our opportunity to go a little bit further than what we were already doing. So I think DeCarlo mentioned that the statewide policy of LD 2003 focused on ADUs by right and affordable housing. I'm just going to focus on the incentives for affordable housing today. Basically what we did, our Kittery's version of implementing that was we took every single zone in Kittery that has been labeled as a growth area, which is 8 zones out of 16. We got York beat for the number of zones, and we added that density boost. So now in every growth area, if you designate half of your units as affordable, you get a 2.5 times density. So the land area per dwelling shrinks significantly. We also do the parking reduction. So sometimes that means going from 2 parking spaces per dwelling to less than 1. I do want to note that some of our zones already had something like this, and it was actually a little less high, the threshold. A few zones triggered a density bonus at 25% rather than 50% affordable. And we did keep that number for reasons that I'll cover in a little bit. So we had actually projects that were involved in the Affordable Housing Ordinance before and after LD 2003. The first project that was ever related was 22 Shapley, which is the mainspring building. Fairtide is actually involved in this project. So this is a wraparound service hub that Fairtide is going to be in. Footprints, a local food pantry, I believe the GA office is going to be in there, and then there's 6 units of supportive housing. So this was the first time we had a project with affordable housing since the ordinance was drafted. So we were actually able to provide them some incentives. After the fact, we went back and we said, hey, you get a discount on your permitting costs for the entire project, not just the housing, because you were providing affordable housing for our stock. So we were able to hopefully help them with their fundraising goal. I didn't list it on here, but we also had a pretty large multifamily project that was approved earlier this year in the outlets, an apartment of about 110 units. And they actually exceeded their affordable housing minimum because of the permitting discounts that we had. They wanted to get that incentive, so they added a few extra units. So moving to LD 2003, we haven't seen any large projects utilize it yet. Most of the ones have been kind of small scale, but they've all been really interesting. My favorite two, I'm going to start with 3 Walker Street. This is an area in the Forsyth in Kittery, which is our downtown. This was a pretty small project. A developer wanted to build some office space and a dwelling unit. And then they realized they could fit a few more apartments if they designated them as affordable. And that's exactly what they did. This project was approved earlier this year, and now we're seeing affordable residential units being built right in the heart of a growing downtown in walking distance of literally everything, in a pretty modern looking building too. It's the one on the left in the picture. The next one is actually my favorite so far that has utilized LD 2003, because 9 Village Green Drive was a complete 180 to what was originally proposed. We had a developer go to the planning board proposing 4 single family homes. And once we made them aware of the incentives from LD 2003, they literally scrapped the whole project and redrew everything with a row of townhouses, a 4th of which were affordable. And that is currently in the planning board process. But if it's approved, it would be the first example of owner-occupied affordable homes where the mortgage and sale price is tied to AMI, and it follows, the deed restriction follows whoever purchases and sells it. So I'm bringing that up just to show an example of how this ordinance is so new. We are still seeing firsts, even a year and a half in. We're still learning. Questions are still being brought up by developers and staff that we are answering here in and here out. So to transition to that, I'm going to call them the opportunities for growth, just things that have been brought up as potential things that might hamper development, or things that we might have suggestions on tweaking in the future in other towns. I'm going to start with LD 2003. So from what I've seen, and it's only been 6 months since it was implemented, but 50% is a very high threshold to trigger incentives for developers sometimes, especially if you work in a community that is not always that competitive when it comes to federal or state funding for housing, or if you don't have local levers like TIFs, like tax increment financing, to help fund projects yet. Having those high thresholds, I've spoken to developers, I've brought up the density bonuses we have, and they respond by saying they can't make the numbers work at that high a number. So that's one thing to keep in mind. One thing I've noticed working in Kittery, especially last year, is whether intentional or not, sometimes the way that commercial development is zoned, it makes it more appealing than residential. So we had kind of an arms race for hotels last year. A lot of projects came through site plan review around the same time that I was reviewing that multifamily dwelling that I mentioned. And, in addition to the fact that projects like rooming houses and hotels don't have to deal with that land area per dwelling standard that dwelling units have to, sometimes your code might make it, they might have a less strict parking requirement for a hotel than an apartment, or the sewer impact fees might be a little easier to handle. So these are things that, again, whether intentional or not, they're little things that might seem like oversights, but then when you add them all together, they become a barrier to residential development that you can't overcome with just incentives. They're things you need to take down before you can really steer people towards focusing primarily on housing, if that's what your community wants. And then the last thing I want to focus on, and I appreciate Eric mentioning the affordability issue with area median income, just to reflect, we are York is one of the fastest growing areas. And when you tie your affordable units to area median income, you kind of rely on that income staying stable. So when you're in a region like York County, where income and wealth is growing so quickly, you see those numbers go up every year in a pretty high number. I'm not going to get too high into the numbers, but I'd say that's part of why we require utilities be deducted from the number. So because if for example, a one bedroom in Kittery at 80% AMI can go for $1,700 a month, because that's just how the calculation works. Even when you deduct utilities, that is a hard number to swallow, especially when it goes to the planning board. That's a number you need to explain to the public as to why that works. So there are a lot of options for what you can tie your affordable unit housing numbers to. AMI is only one example. There's also fair market value. So that's just one thing to consider for people that pursue this. So just in summary, I want to go back to those projects that I mentioned in the middle of my presentation. Those projects are things that would not have existed without the ordinance in place and the incentives we had, right? So by having inclusionary zoning, we got affordable units we otherwise wouldn't have. By having incentives with and without LD 2003, we got completely redefined projects. And that is in part because staff communicated with these developers, and we got them to change their projects. And I truly feel that it's been a rewarding year and a half. I feel like we've been pushing the needle in the right direction, and I'd love to see that needle get pushed in as many towns as possible. So if people are interested in this, I guess just some takeaways from my experiences is, if you are going to pursue inclusionary zoning or some type of requirement, you have to complement that with incentives. You need to provide carrots, because not only does that make sure you're still appealing for development, it also increases your potential to get larger unit or larger numbers for affordable housing stock or housing stock in general. I would suggest also just communicating with stakeholders in the area, not just developers, but people that are in tune with the market, with understanding of construction timelines or construction costs, to see what types of incentives and thresholds and discounts and relief that everyone needs to be able to make the projects that everyone wants. And I would say finally, just the more flexibility you can bake into your policy, both for planning staff and the planning board or any regulatory body that's involved in the project, the more buy-in you're going to get and the more units you'll get in the long run. If you can make this process feel more like a conversation between the town and a housing developer rather than a checklist, it's going to be more beneficial in the long run in really every possible way. So I hope that my experiences have helped shed some light on what this looks like. Like I said, it's only been a year and a half, so I'm sure there's going to be more opportunities that come up for me in the future, some more learning experiences. But if I've helped anyone kind of see what something like affordable housing and inclusionary zoning might look like in their community, I hope I've helped. And I'm also, again, happy to answer any questions offline if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. That was great. I love hearing about Kittery's moving the needle. I love the deed restrictions, the higher permitting discounts. Really appreciate that. And we have a little time left. We're going to jump to Ryan. Ryan is in the city of Dover. He's a housing navigator as well. And so many things happen in the same bubble in southern Maine. And we always hear about what's going on just over the border. And hopefully we can, both communities can encourage each other to elevate. So we'd love to hear from Ryan. What's going on over there?
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me as part of this presentation. Can you guys see what I'm sharing now?
Yes.
And thank you, Max and DeCarlo, for everything you're doing across the border as well. I'm on the board of Fairtide, so a big shout out to everything that Kittery has done and what that means for affordability in our community as well. So New Hampshire is funky in a lot of ways. The primary one when it comes to housing policy and affordability is that inclusionary zoning actually isn't permissible under state law. So we cannot say to a developer, if you're going to have a 10-unit project, 10% of those have to be affordable, which causes us to think a little differently and a little more creatively. I just want to start real quick with just a quick little community profile. Dover is a city in New Hampshire. Population is a little over 33,000. We're about 50-50 renter owner demographically, and we're getting younger, which is exciting. The average age is 36.2 in town, which means I am officially over the hill, which is exciting for me. When it comes to everything that we do from a planning perspective, I actually joined the city at a really great time. We were going through the master plan vision chapter. But everything we do, we want to make sure that it aligns with our community values. So our community has identified 8 pillar values, which you'll see here. I also linked the vision chapter of the document if you're curious about it. But when we say we aspire to have affordable and attainable housing and support services, we have to make sure that the laws that we have on the books are actually supportive of that. So I'd like reminding folks that zoning or any regulations are a written reflection of your values. And if those don't align for whatever reason, it's time to think about changing them, which we do on about an annual basis. So our zoning ordinance, our master plan, it's very much a living document changing with the times as we go. So I'll focus just on 3 tools here. These images and actually full write-ups on how they function are available on the New Hampshire Housing Toolbox.org website. It's pretty specific to New Hampshire, but a lot of the tools are available in other jurisdictions as well. So if you're curious about anything I talk about or want to see some of the other 20 some odd solutions on there, feel free to take a look. But I'll do a deeper dive on transfer of development right, because that's our primary affordability and conservation incentive. We'll talk a little bit about downtown density, mixed use. And then just because I was asked to talk about tax increment financing, we'll talk about that and one really exciting project we have going on right in our downtown. So transfer of development rights, really at its core, if you think about like prioritizing both housing production, but also conservation at the same time, density definitely has a place, but it doesn't have a place everywhere. We have high priority natural resources that we also want to conserve. So the basic crux of this as a tool is to concentrate development where there's already infrastructure, where there's water sewer availability, where it can support additional housing density and not kind of perpetuate suburban sprawl, which was very much the theme of the 50s through now. So the way this normally works is a developer would purchase the rights to develop a property that we would prefer to conserve in order to get a density incentive over here. That works really well when there's kind of county administration, county oversight of land use. It doesn't work so well at the municipal level. So we got creative with it. And rather than do a direct land transfer, we actually allow developers to purchase the rights to additional units directly from the Conservation Commission so that the Conservation Commission has funds and availability to secure easements and conservation on parcels that we would prefer not to see developed. So our process is entirely discretionary. Like Max was saying, giving the planning board the authority to make these kind of discretionary decisions is enormously helpful. They're not obliged to sell the units. It's very case by case. It's based on context. It's based on, again, community values. And through this program, we've been able to permit hundreds of units. It's probably 300 or 400 above and beyond what would normally be allowed by the zoning, and raised, I think we're pushing $3 million for the Conservation Fund now, which has allowed us, since we rolled out this program in 2018, to secure, this is an old slide, so 60 some acres that we've been able to conserve in our community since 2018, which I think is great, because we got, housing and conservation. So our fee schedule, just so you can see it, it's based predominantly on the conservation value of an acre of land, but you'll see that it scales down based on the level of affordability, if it's going to be rented, if it's in a village type complex, so mixed use kind of neighborhood feel, or if it's size restricted. So we're trying to encourage smaller buildings, smaller footprints, smaller living, smaller lots, is kind of how those fees are structured. These will likely change soon. And then to kind of, again, tack on to what Max had said, in Dover, we have chosen to go with the HUD fair market value when we determine what affordability and attainability means in our community. This is a market-based affordability metric for us. So HUD fair market is always a 40th percentile of regular market rent. So if you think 50th percentile is market, this metric is always going to be below market. So when we are talking to developers who want to kind of add additional units into a project, if those are going to be priced at this level, and again, this changes year over year, the deed restriction is in perpetuity, we actually don't charge them anything for the additional unit cost, which allows us to kind of holistically, project by project, figure out how we can embed affordable units in really any and all development that we see without having to mandate it, because we can't mandate it. So again, we do this base rent. We don't do any utility calculations. The deed restriction is, again, in perpetuity. And we also don't do any income verification. The rationale for that is that there's an affordability need across the income and age spectrum. And by not doing that verification, not being involved as a municipality in the verification of tenants, it relieves the municipality from a lot of detail work that we are not set up to really administer or be a part of. So different approaches, but again, all with the same overarching goal. So I did want to provide a quick little rundown of how a project works so you can see it. This one's off Bellamy Road. It's behind the high school, but it was just shy of 8 acres. It's actually zoned in our rural residential zone. And a typical subdivision yield on this would have given us 9 single-family homes, all of which would probably have sold between $8 and $1 million based on that neighborhood. Now, though, with transfer of development right and the purchase of additional units, we ended up with 31 total units, 13 single-family homes, all of them size restricted to 1,400 square feet. We were able to preserve an existing duplex, a barn, because it was an old farm that had to come down, was basically rebuilt as a 4-unit multifamily. And there are 3 other multifamily townhomes there as well. 8 of the units in that project are deed restricted in perpetuity to that HUD fair market metric. So just by allowing for the additional density in this project, we ended up with 22 more housing units than the zoning would normally have allowed. 8 of which are going to be affordable in perpetuity, many of which are now a fair amount smaller than they would have been had we just gone by the base zoning and had those 9 units come out of that. So as far as my thoughts on this as an ordinance, it really just augments the underlying zoning with a discretionary process, concentrates development where density makes sense, supports conservation and resilience goals, and it fosters creativity in the development process and open conversation with developers about the needs of our community and how we can really kind of work together to build a home for everyone. Downtown density mixed use. I'll just breeze through these last 2 as best I can because I know we're short on time. This is just really a focus again on bringing back historic development patterns of downtown urban cores. So again, there was a reason that there were businesses on the ground floor and housing above. It's handy when you can live and work and walk within a community without having to rely on a vehicle to get you all over the place. And it's how we used to build communities. So Dover's a great example. It was an old mill town, very mixed use. And then like with everywhere in the 50s, 60s, 70s, as cars became a huge priority, we ended up seeing huge swaths of downtown good urban land and neighborhoods get paved over for parking lots for strip malls. And that just makes me sad. So we're trying to kind of pull that back and refocus on what did our community look like? What do people love about it? And can we replicate it if push came to shove? I live in Hampton, New Hampshire. Our entire downtown corridor along Route 1 is non-compliant, which I don't understand kind of the purpose of that. But again, it was different development patterns kind of coming into play at a different time. So thinking about the context of your community, what makes it valuable, what you like about it, and then doing a little digging to find out if that is replicable or even permitted and compliant with the current laws. Again, the laws are a reflection of your community values. If they're not aligning, it's probably time to rewrite them. The way that we regulate this, again, a shout out to DeCarlo as well for mentioning form-based code. It's my favorite way to regulate anything because it focuses on look and feel, the maintenance of neighborhood character. And if you structure it right, these are pictures from one of our zoning tables in there, but it really does a good job of identifying what the buildings look like, where the setbacks are, where the lot placement's going to be, what the landscaping has to look like in order for it to kind of meet what our community has identified as its look and feel. And that's what we regulate to, less on what's in there. And in our central business district, we also have no parking maximum requirement. We require reasonable accommodation. And for commercial uses, reasonable accommodation is street parking. So we're not adding copious amounts of excess parking for that whole strip mall downtown feel. And then TIFs, this was mentioned very briefly, tax increment financing. It basically takes a municipality's ability to its bonding authority to do infrastructure and perform infrastructure and development activities that are in support of community goals in specific areas. The one thing I'll caution communities on with this is it requires substantial oversight. It requires community buy-in. It requires community risk tolerance and a willingness to be a partner with a developer and engage in those kind of public-private partnerships. The bond actually, it does get repaid over time, obviously, without taxpayer expense through a variety of tools. And I'll show you real quick the one that people may have heard of in Dover. So we have the Kachika Waterfront Development District. This was a former DPW and wastewater management site, again, right in the middle of downtown along the riverfront. Brownfields, tanning hides, it was a really rough site that the city has been working on over the past 30 or 40 years to kind of piece it together, identify it as a tax increment financing district, and then pursue public-private partnerships to develop it into what our community has decided we would like to see there. So the city currently owns the land. We are currently performing all of the improvements, the streetscapes, all those things with our bond financing. That bond is going to be repaid by a combination of the sale of the improved land to our public-private partnership, coupled with, over time, obviously a city-owned parcel that was full of tanning hides and whatever else was residue from the wastewater treatment plant wasn't generating a whole lot of tax income for us. But now, once it's improved and sold and on the private market and fully kind of formed, the city will be recouping all of those costs and then some with the increased valuations of the property over time. So again, the whole process is very public. We have a public committee, public board that oversees both the partnership process, the bonding process, and all of that. But it's a really neat tool for communities to leverage if they have a specific part of their community that is really underperforming, that they would like to see some more public benefit to. So this is just kind of the overall plan here. It'll be how many units? 400 and change units, probably a hotel, some townhomes, a few of them in there affordable. There'll be a boat launch, kayaking, rowing, all kinds of good things that our community can do, be a part of, and enjoy. And obviously there are commercial components too, where, you know, previously there was a whole lot of nothing going on there. And that's it. So I don't know if I'm happy to answer questions, or if people had questions for others who presented, I can turn it over.
Thank you, Ryan. I can't say thank you enough to everyone here. The amount of information shared is fantastic. The chat's been blowing up. I recorded all of the chat, so I'm going to make sure I have it all and can follow up with the presenters and get the responses to the folks who put it in there. And again, I just want to say thank you to our speakers, Eric DeCarlo, Max and Ryan, and Carrie at the library in the background there. Thank you for helping us do these housing related webinars. This is our 8th one, 2nd year. super proud of what we've been able to produce and to share with everybody and get some ideas and conversations really generated around what is affordability, how can we help our community members, how can we set some new goals and reach them, and how can we do that with zoning sometimes as a reflection of what our needs are in our community. Again, this will be recorded. It'll be on our website. I'll send out the link. And upcoming for YCSA is an Aging in Place series on October 21st and November 18th. We'll have a free Aging in Place free class for folks learning about important documents. BRG Legal, local elder law attorney will be there to help guide us. So we'll be focusing a little bit more on aging in place in the winter, and then we'll come back to housing probably next spring. But again, thank you all to our presenters and everyone who attended today. I will follow up with an email. Take care and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Amber. Great job.
Thanks for having us.